It's my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, David Brin. How many of you have read his novels? I thought you might have. His science fiction novels. He is an astrophysicist. He gained his PhD at UCSD, so he's a local boy who's made more than good. And he studies comets and other particles in the cosmos. And he's also had the privilege and the pleasure, or maybe not, of having one of his books, The Postman, made into a motion picture, and Kevin Costner was the star. But today he's going to be talking about the big question of existence. So please welcome David Brin.
What could be a bigger picture than the question of existence? Can technology empower freedom and human survival? Now, the context in which this is set is vast. There is one aspect in the upper left-hand corner. It's called Fermis' silent cosmos. We'll be getting to that first, but we'll also talk about how many people are afraid that we'll repeat past failure modes that destroyed past civilizations, whether or not civilizations go in a big cycle that grow old and die, whether or not we have the power in our minds to conceive enough foresight to be able to avoid the pitfalls that lie ahead of us. We'll talk briefly about the singularity, some of the traps that stand in the way of us getting there properly, and some of the tools that might help us get there, all in less than 17 minutes. I usually give Castro-length speeches about these topics individually, so let's plunge ahead. Fermi's silent cosmos is based upon a question that Enrico Fermi asked at the end of World War II. Many of you are familiar with it. His students were talking about how exciting it will be when we meet aliens and how obvious it must be that there must be aliens out there. Frank Drake's famous equation. Oh, I'm pressing all the wrong buttons. Frank Drake's famous equation there. You put in all the parameters about whether or not, how many life-type worlds there ought to be and how frequently life ought to arise. It seems like it ought to, given the Miller-Urey-Orgel experiments that occurred up here at UCSD. And yet, the radio telescopes, I've been involved in SETI for 30 years, the radio telescopes seem to have come up with nothing so far. Now, I can talk about the reasons why they've come up with nothing so far, but the fundamental issue facing us today is, what does that imply about us? If civilizations should be frequent out there, and we're seeing no signs not only of radio using civilizations in space, but any sign that Earth was ever visited across the 2 billion years that it was prime real estate. 2 billion years when it had an oxygen atmosphere and no human beings to defend it, Independence Day style. The point is, that's a great big experimental test tube result. The apparent emptiness of the galaxy is explained by different people depending upon their emotional investment in this topic. They choose one of the factors of the Drake equation and say that Earth must be rare. And certainly Earth is rare among the 500 planets that we've discovered so far, just in the last 10 years. Or that life must be rare, or that civilization must be rare, or that civilizations kill themselves off. The point is, we might either be rare, and the filter that is keeping the numbers small lie behind us, or there is some filter that lies ahead of us that culls down the number of bright young species that actually make it. And that's the scary thing. That's what scared us about the nuclear bomb. That's what should scare us every time we just come across one of these new things and make us think, is this the filter? Might this be it? Might this be the big mistake? And my new novel called Existence is really cheery. It goes through all the different possible ways we may blow it. But there's hope as well. Now, one of the key themes is repetition of past errors. Jared Diamond's great book, Collapse, talks about how frequently things in the past, civilizations in the past, failed because they repeated the same errors over and over again. Like errors having to do with a failure to adapt to environmental degradation, failure to adapt to the fact that their herds of goats and sheep and their irrigation projects were actually poisoning the land that they were irrigating. Mistakes that were made by past civilizations more slowly than the mistakes we're making now. The difference with us now is twofold. One, we're making the mistakes far faster. And two, with science, and because we're making the mistakes faster, we're noticing, which our ancestors did not. Now, which is the more important fact? I guess we'll find out. Stay tuned across the next 100 years. Now, one prescribed solution is renunciation. Jared Diamond points out that there were several past civilizations that lived in tune with their environment. It happens they were also tyrannies. They were also tyrannies that lived by the ancient human social order of the pyramid. And they managed to, the Tokugawas in Japan, banned the wheel because it tore up the roads. That's one way of doing it. It's not really our way. If you take a look on the left, you have this typical pyramidal social structure with a few at the top lording it over masses below. We fell into this social structure everywhere that human beings discovered metals and agriculture, where big guys would pick up metal implements and take other men's women and wheat. And it's what you would do, it's what you would do, it's what you would do. Because we're all descended from the harems of those guys. I was at a talk last night here at UCSD. This guy's looking for Genghis Khan's tomb. It turns out 5% of human males on this planet are descended from Genghis Khan. He had a very successful harem, and we're descended from him. Ladies, it explains a lot. But we can exercise self-control, we can get better, and the proof of it is that there is another type of social structure. One in which there's well-off people and there are poor people, but the well-off, the middle class, outnumbers the poor. That should be on our flag. That should be the flag or symbol of our civilization. The Enlightenment civilization, the Enlightenment diamond. And you'll notice that there is less poverty. Because when you outnumber the poor, you no longer shrug and assume the poor will always be with us, as they say in the Bible. Instead, they're a minority, a lake of bitterness surrounded by prosperity, and suddenly it's somebody's fault. Well, it's not so much somebody's fault as we haven't solved it enough, and it will never go away. The poor will always go with us if this thing works, because the diamond will keep rising, and we'll keep having higher expectations and higher notions of what it means to be poor, higher notions of what's acceptable. This may not be what we've done successfully, completely to your satisfaction so far, but the fact that you're dissatisfied with something that's glorious compared to the past is an example of the great madness of the Enlightenment, the magnificent madness of ambition, the belief that we can be better than our ancestors, and the belief that this does not insult our ancestors because that's what they would have wanted us to be. I'll attack the right, I'll attack the left because I despise the stupid left-right political axis. We should abandon it if for no other reason because it's French. But the fact of the matter is, one of the madnesses of the left is that if we brag about how far we've come, we're somehow insulting our ancestors. Duh! Would you be disappointed if your children were stupider than you, your grandchildren, if they had a civilization as dumb as this? You're working hard to make them better than you. You want them to be Star Trek. Well, then why shouldn't we be better than our ancestors? That honors them. In any event, can we do this? Because the problem is that this had better be in a tractor state. And it's hard because almost all of human nature, genetics, pulls us toward this state, the natural human pyramid. And I believe that's one of the explanations for the great silence, the Fermi paradox. I believe that a great many intelligent civilizations out there naturally fall into the kind of social pattern that almost all human civilizations fell into, because it serves the genetic self-interest of the elite. And they would use the new tools, the new powers, the new surveillance to make sure that this happened, and nothing would ever stop it ever again. And that's why I wrote The Transparent Society, my nonfiction book about will technology force us to choose between privacy and freedom. All right, there are many potential pitfalls, so many it's hard to count, but I'm going to tell you one really quick. I'm going to talk real fast. When I was at Caltech, undergraduate back in it was before this whole internet thing, although I predicted it in Earth. There are web pages. The point is that We were confused and terrified by the notion that as human civilization kept learning more and more and more and more at an accelerating pace, in order to keep up in a given scientific field, you'd have to know more and more about less and less. The vocabulary would narrow down. You wouldn't even know if somebody was duplicating your work in the next building because their vocabulary would be different. It would become harder and harder, like Sisyphus, to push the boulder